Now we will go we'll continue on the panel. And so now, if you agree, we'll take the two next intervention, and then we group the questions. Sorry, but we have to accommodate. Of course, there are committees today, so we have to accommodate for members that they have to intervene or to vote. So we will start with Thea Jaliashvili, who is the first deputy director of OSCE ODIHR. Rings a bell. So ODIHR is obviously operating of a different geographic context, different zone, but of course our dear partner. So what is ODIHR's, I will also guide you with a few questions if you don't mind. So what is ODIHR's approach to assessing online campaigns and social media in elections, which are quite important in new zone of operation, with a focus on the follow-up to recommendations? Another question maybe is about what emerging threats ODIHR's observers are reporting most in online campaigning, and how does this influence the observation methodology, and how ODIHR addresses the need to tackle these threats, because that might, of course, be of an example for others observer. Thank you very much. Up to you, Thea.
Thank you. Thank you. It's indeed a great pleasure to join in these very timely and important discussions that we're having today. Well, at the times when the European security architecture is under the severe strain, reaffirming that the human rights are not an add-on but a core element of the security is crucial. And of course, the genuine democratic elections, respect for fundamental freedoms, and meaningful democratic participation are not only markers of internal stability, but also essential to build the trust and predictability amongst the states. Really, I mean, as an ODIHR, I mean, we started our operation as the Office for Free Election. Therefore, our core values when it comes to the election observation remains very relevant and important in order to implement our mandate. So in terms of our approaches when it comes to the social media monitoring, of course, allow me to highlight a few methodological aspects of ODIHR that has been developed throughout the decades, and of course in close cooperation and coordination with the participating states who upheld and are obliged to uphold their commitments when it comes to the democratic values and principles and the protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms. Of course, one thing that has to be clear is also that we should expect from the international observers, broadly speaking, because it's not always easy only for the international observers to observe the elections, but also highlight the important roles of the local organizations who are established as fast and fact-checking organizations and platforms themselves that are always going sometimes to be better positioned to report on the concrete number of incidents and the extent of their spread. And of course, our observation, on the other hand, as with other aspects of the election providers, is an assessment of how the matters are handled by the state authorities. So one of these, of course, I mean, very important methodological tool and the approach we have, we are looking into the application of the campaign regulations and other legislations when it comes to the online space. And of course, I mean, you recently adopted this Digital Service Act, but it's not always the case when we're talking about the OSCE other participating states. So that makes, of course, it's even more difficult when we're looking into the concrete regulatory framework, which is of crucial importance when we're talking about the election observation monitorings. And in some states, it's just assumed that local provisions apply to the online campaigns as well, which is not always the case. And we cannot, of course, I mean, live and being only with the assumptions remaining there. Another important tool, of course, I mean, is to look into the overall digital environment in the countries that being observed, including the public access to the internet news consumption, the frequency of online harassment, and including also, I mean, of course, I mean, addressing the incidents, hate crimes, and also, I mean, particularly the women candidates or political figures and journalists that are frequently targeted recently when we're looking into those observation aspects. But here we also need to look into the kind of like having this golden balance, right? In one hand, the regulation, but on the other hand, importance of the freedom of access and the accountability when we are talking about the general fundamental freedoms and human rights. Another important aspect that we look into during our observations, of course, I mean, it's structural issues and structural aspects. So whether we do have in the country, in observed country, a specific structures that are handling the issues related to these online campaigns. And of course, it can be again very diverse because we are not talking about some heterogenic, environment that we are operating, but it can be very diverse. It can vary task force, working groups, official structures, interagency agents, monitoring, fast fact-checking programs. So we have a very, very, diverse actors when we're talking about the structures. But the importance, of course, is that how these structures are operating and whether they're capable in order to look into these aspects. Another issue, of course, for our monitoring platforms is to access the platforms, their ability themselves to gather the necessary information and reactiveness of the platforms to the request of the authorities. And in addition, the teams reports on the initiatives that platforms are taking for the specific elections to combat the disinformation or misuse of their services. Another important aspect is how fast and quick those platforms are when we're talking about review or removal of the content, which sometimes becomes, and misused. Of course, other issues that we are looking into when we're observing is, of course, the application of the campaign finance legislations, and not least important, how the data and privacy data is protecting during those campaigns. And last but not least, because really there is a huge list of the things, and then of course I will be, eager to talk a little bit more during our questions and answer sessions. But also effectiveness of the mechanism for the resolution of the private data disputes. This is also another very important element when we look into the application and when we conduct our monitoring of the election observations. The second question, as I understood, was about the current threats that we have been observing. I really don't want to be repetitive, but really once again to highlight, number of very important things, which is extensive use of the social media, which is becoming more and more, but the highest dangers with the low level of digital and media literacy amongst the citizens, which is, of course, is a varying trend that we have, we are observing. Widespread, of course, attempts to manipulate the online visibility that has been already very well mentioned. Lack of resources, lack of awareness, in particular, including the civil society organizations who can be also very important, partners when we're talking about the observation issues, and, of course, the decentralized and extraterritorial nature of the social network platforms, which makes also very difficult for the states to address these issues. And the late actions that when we're talking about this risk assessment that has been already very well mentioned about how this regulated, that the way that the platforms themselves react to the risk assessment sometimes is getting too late, and then the things has been already happened and done. So, and this is, of course, another very important thing to mention here. Well, it's very difficult, of course, to be overly positive when we are facing and when we have this extremely, this democratic backsliding. Broadly speaking, and shrinking the spaces, and of course, the huge amount of the challenges. But I really would like, to mention that this year, 2025, for us, for the OSCE, ODIHR, definitely marks this 50th anniversary of the Helsinki process, Helsinki Final Act. And we truly remain, hopeful that we will be, with these joint efforts, being able to address those challenges and of course, evolve as these new technologies, artificial intelligence, continues. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thea. And so we go first to Hrasto Kugel, who is the Executive Director of Memo 98. Before we open the floor to question, and then Armin will do the conclusions. A tough task, Armin. But let me guide you first with a few questions, if I may. Indeed, now we hear that laws alone, despite our efforts, do not protect voters. So how could the EU rules like the DSA, the AI Act, which have been already mentioned a lot, could be enforced in real time when disinformation spreads by the hour, and Thea also mentioned this. So now it's really a matter of hours, not months as before. Then second point on as with the public trust in elections falling, unfortunately, isn't observation, like letting people see really the process and observe the process, one of the best ways to restore confidence? And last point, how can the EU ensure that observers and civic actors are protecting human rights defenders and not punished for safeguarding democracy? Stefanie reminded about the colleagues in prison in some countries. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for these questions, and thank you very much for the invitation. It's also my real honor to be here and to speak with you. I will also try to, same as Thea, I will try to speak as an observer with some 25 years of election observation experience. And so I think when it comes to your first question, I think the EU has really come up with a very comprehensive toolbox. I think we heard the previous speakers describing the Digital Services Act, requiring platforms to assess systematic risks, be transparent about ads, adjust algorithms when disinformation threatens elections, the AI Act, which bans manipulative AI and classifies election-related AI as high risk. The Media Freedom Act, which protects the editorial independence, the TTPA, which sheds light on political advertising. But I think there are two main problems with these laws. The first one we heard actually Ms. Alexandra Gysi to say, that the European Commission is actually not doing its job to implement these laws. And the second one is what I would say from the observation perspectives, and as you really said in your question, I mean, the election move fast, but laws move very slow. So I think those of us who have actually experienced being part of election observation, I mean, we know that if you do things after the elections, I mean, this will not be enough to sort of ameliorate the actual damage, which is happening in real time. And unfortunately, with these new tools, this is really what is happening. And so perhaps three things to talk, maybe to offer, to bridge this gap. And very much repeating what some of the previous speakers already said. I really believe that we need real-time transparency tools. I really believe that these databases of political ads under the TTPA or DSA must be available in real time, not days or weeks later. And this is something that we have experienced personally, and we know that the media regulators are experiencing. So they are actually in a better position as institutions vis-a-vis the platforms, but they are basically experiencing these delays, and this is actually even the period before Trump won elections. When there were definitely more efforts to be more cooperative. So now it's even worse. I think, and Stefanie mentioned this already, I think as election observers we need to have guaranteed access to platform data. Otherwise, we will see only half of the election campaign. I mean, unless we can really see what is happening, unless we see the labeling, especially coming now with AI-generated content. Without this, we cannot verify or counter manipulation as it happens. And the third is the possibility of tying the crisis protocols of DSA to elections. We saw that it is possible. We saw it during the pandemic, that the platforms were reacting much more quickly. Why is not possible to do this also during elections? With the question of trust, I think this is my biggest worry, again, as someone who has spent years, focusing on elections, because we see the trust is declining. I mean, one example, in 2023 in Slovakia, more than 50% of people believed that the elections would be manipulated several months before actually the elections took place. And so I believe that one potential way how to tackle this problem is actually election observation. So election observation, both international or domestic, I think acts as democracy's early warning system. And I think it not only detects manipulation, but it also rebuilds the confidence, because you can see things with your own eyes. And this is, I think, what matters now. So I would really, advocate for election observation per se. And the last question is somehow related to, how can EU ensure that actually observers and those that Stephanie mentioned at the very beginning, the colleagues who are currently in prison just mainly for doing their job of election observation, doing their job for civic activism, which I think is the best sort of recipe to these negative trends. Disinformation is, the main aim of disinformation is to turn societies into being very passive. We see what happened in Russia. And so I propose that the best way to tackle this is actually by activism. And also the question is somewhat personal for me, because as we speak, my organization is facing criminal investigation into 2023 Slovak parliamentary elections, when we were basically doing a couple of different types of projects. One was to improve the information environment by doing this voting advice application, where we involved all the parties and included, the election platforms, so people could make more informed choices. The second one was to do with mobilization of first and second time voters. So I think here what we see is that these bad actors are not only weaponizing information, but they are also weaponizing institutions. And these institutions are then used against observers. So here I would like to propose that not only the Venice Commission, which already has done so, but also the EU recognize observers as human rights defenders, and that we really are able to do our job, and we don't have to experience our colleagues being imprisoned for several years simply for what they are doing. So I'll stop here, but happy to answer any questions at a later stage.
Thank you so much. So now we have, let's say, 10 minutes for question, because then Armin needs to conclude, just to make his task even more difficult. Then we can have more questions, but you will have to sacrifice a part of the coffee break. It's in your hands. So who wants to start? And we'll group as well by a few questions. And please, again, say who you are. And if there is to one panelist you want to address, say it as well. Madam, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Sarah Birete from Uganda. My question goes to the status of domestic election observers as human rights defenders and the shrinking context of elections globally, but worse in Africa. As domestic election observers, we face a challenge of increasing harassment from our governments, and we have a decreasing voice of the international community in protection of observers working in difficult contexts in Africa, especially in Uganda and other countries where democracy is really on a great decline. With the changes in the US government, such people in contexts like mine look towards the EU as the greater voice in protection of democracy, in protection of rights of human rights observers and credibility of elections. But this voice sometimes does not come out, and I would like to know, as members of the EU Parliament, what do you think is possible in adding your voice as a credible member of the international community in protection of election observers like me? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you. My name is Levan Atrashvili. I'm representing one of the Georgian election observer organizations. I had a question about the third-party involvement and the role of third parties in general in campaign finance, in the disinformation campaigns and information campaigns in general. So what is your stance on this issue? So when we talk about the regulations, I guess the most difficult parties to regulate the involvement and impact of third parties like anonymous groups, users, some political action committees in the United States, for instance, and each and every individual country has its own kind of third-party actors. Could you please comment on that?
Thank you very much. Yes, madam.
Thank you very much. My name is Ellen Dingani from Zimbabwe. My question is to Rasto, Memo 98. Last year, I think during FURIC, we spoke about the issue of fake observers, but I think as you were speaking, you spoke about access to data by observers, either domestic or international, so that we can counter the manipulation of data. There was an aspect of naming and shaming them, but how do we do that without compromising our security? There are reports that have been done by organizations based in Europe, naming and shaming fake observers in Africa, but they don't seem to see this report. They don't seem even to shy. But we are really concerned because they are mushrooming, especially in authoritarian states where we now have fake observers whom we don't even know who is funding them. And I think it's a challenge in terms of even compromising our security to name and shame them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. First gender balance, Mr. and then you, madam.
Thank you. My name is Mikko Salo. I'm from Finland, an institution called Faktabari, who has been involved mostly on disinformation tackling, but also on elections. The generative AI was touched every once in a while, but I mean, that is really an upcoming thing and amplifies everything that you are talking about. But I was wondering what kind of resources there is to monitor, for example, the narratives on the online and what kind of preventive work they might be doing. Unfortunately, the MEPs are not here anymore, but we have to check out also the... Oh, sorry, I'm sorry. So we have to also foresee the companies that are generative AI that are, of course, very, very much linked to the same technology companies that we talk with the social media. But just as an aspect, what do you see?
My name is Martina Hoffman. I'm with Political Accountability Foundation. And my question is about the focus of your debate, because you've discussed lots of ways, legislative ways, the social media platforms can be restricted, can be monitored. But what about citizen education? What about voter education? Is this not part of focus? Is it about education not working? Why this was not part of your debate?
Thank you. We stop there for the moment. No, sorry, Mr.
Sorry, just a quick follow-up to her question. And for me, it's how do we balance between behavioral change but also legislating? Because we can legislate, put in place punitive measures, for example, fines, but if I can afford to pay a fine, then I get away with it and I do it over and over again. So what is important? Is it about behavioral change together with legislation, because you can only legislate so much. But then I think what is important is also about behavioral change. And I think it goes to also civic education, that citizens should realize the role of citizen observers, so much so that the citizens, would help to build the trust in the role of observers.
Yes, thank you very much. Okay, we won't overload the panelists, so maybe we start. You starting? You start. Okay.
To you so specifically, as I understand.
Thank you very much for all questions. Very good questions. I mean, maybe you help me with the very last point that you added to that previous question, and this also remains to be basically my hope, and I think very much my hope is actually in voter and citizen education. You know, I'm a little bit skeptical, as we heard in the first part of this, you know, that the platforms would ever somehow go against the business models. But I'm sort of maybe naively hoping that we will build these antibodies, you know, eventually, and it will take time, and definitely behavioral change is part of it. And you are absolutely right that you can legislate as much, but this is really much more profound change. But certainly, you know, citizen and voter education, and this is where I see the role of election observers, of domestic election observers, and this is exactly what I think could really work the best. You know, that I mean, in the period when we don't trust anyone, you know, actually going physically and observing the elections and having the elections the very old style, you know, paper, filling out and being able to sort of check whether your vote was actually included or not. I think this is where we are. You know, we need to go back to this, and I think this is what could really work, in my view, as a good strategic campaign. And this is where, again, domestic election observers really play an important role. I will also take the question, Madam, I actually worked in Uganda, I would say in my previous life in year 2000. So I at least remember from those times how difficult it was already back then, you know, for domestic observers. So I cannot even imagine now, after those changes that we unfortunately experience globally, I mean, how even more difficult it must be. I mean, for us, we basically, we also look at the EU as the only remaining adult in the room. So it is our hope. I mean, for us, it's a little bit easier because Slovakia is a member state. Therefore, you know, we still somehow feel protected. I can definitely imagine that it must be much more difficult in your case. I mean, for us, what used to work always is really networking, you know, putting basically similar organizations together, you know, trying to act as a network rather than as a single institution. But I know that it is very difficult, and it is always just requiring very difficult choices. And last question I take on fake observation. I mean, being part of EPD, I'm very proud to say that this is where EPD has done fantastic work of putting together a database of fake observers and actually bringing to the light these hypocrisies many of these fake observers basically conduct, you know, by exploiting the advantages of the system, such as in the European Union, and then going and whitewashing elections elsewhere, such as Crimea or other sort of shame elections. So I would say that please look up the EPD database on fake observation. But I think this is the way how, in my view, we should really expose this type of practices.
Thank you. I think, and just to complement, because there were very important issues mentioned, I just, for the Organization of African States, is a party to the Declaration of Principles, and you might be aware that last year we had this also, meeting about the implementation of those principles. So I think that it has been an extremely important platform to discuss at the universal level, of course. From the regional perspective, of course, for us with OSCE, we cover 57 participating states of the OSCE as such. So, but definitely a very important aspect that has been mentioned also, which I would like to highlight about, understanding and not oppressing the observers. In a certain situations, and understanding the whole concept of the human right defender, and definitely, we could really think and talk about how the space is indeed, genuinely shrinking, and how important, is to work and closely collaborate, and ensure and advocate, for the human right defenders. And of course, there is no crystal lines and clear definition, so it can be considered, anyone who really advocates and devotes, for the protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms. And it's, of course, something very important for us, for the ODIHR to get engaged with the civil society organizations, and including the human rights defenders. And we do so quite often in a number of platforms, including this Human Dimension Implementation Conference, or the seminars, or the supplementary Human Dimension meetings. So these can be also resources that can be taken into consideration and used for these purposes. But for the third parties, yes, indeed. Of course, regretfully, there is sometimes quite a hidden and non-regulating campaign when we're talking about the third parties, and usually one of our recommendations would be, of course, to report and to be able to regulate. But of course, this is part of the work that we do during these observation missions, and then something really, really worrying. And last but not least, it was extremely important and very interesting question about how we balance, because as you rightly mentioned, it's not always about the laws. It's a matter how these laws are eventually implemented and realized. And for the implementation, apart from the structures, we really need the behavior changes. And how important, and this is one of the very, frequent recommendations that we do provide to the participating states after as a follow-up, that to make sure how to strengthen the civic education on the election-related aspects, and how to increase their awareness on the related issues. And there was a very important question about resources. Definitely, from our perspective, we rely on the unified budget. That because we really want to be, not using any extra budgetary contributions when it comes to the eventual election observation, in order to make sure that there is no whatsoever conflict of interest, and we conduct our mandated activity, but definitely, the resources are extremely limited, in particular when we're facing this long-standing issue of unimproved budget. But definitely fully agree that resources makes a huge difference if we want to even advocate and strengthen more our work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And before we go to the conclusion, Mr. Sanchez Amor.
Thank you. On the fake elections, we had an excellent conference some months ago with a good, fresh approach to the phenomenon, and then I recommend strongly to the colleagues not having been linked to the other conference to have a look on the issue. On the Finnish colleague, I have not been linked to the negotiation of these laws. It's not part of my committee meeting, but we know for sure that our regulation always is going to be behind the reality, especially the reality in a world as a digital world in which things change. But I think there is also this effort, this legislative effort, it's a signal to the world. Sometimes not reaching the 100% of the theoretical goals, but having a political message also for the citizens. Not only for the platform, but for the citizens. And then I think it's good to spread this idea that if the European Union is doing something with Meta and Google and the other, it's because, if anything, happened behind that I'm not aware. There are always, not only the platforms, but the people to try to introduce in a political electoral campaign ideas. I remember how difficult it is to control the organic content. You are an influencer, you have a lot of followers following your book of receipts, cooking, and then you start talking about a candidate. In the organic content, it's not an advertising, it's the same content. Then you start talking about how good cook is this or other candidate, and then how pretty he is, and how good ideas have the country. And this is organic content. Maybe paid, maybe not, but for sure it's very difficult to prosecute kind of black money being conveyed to a private person using 1 million followers for other purposes than the stated purposes they have. We do need to make the effort on literacy of the voters, but this is a general problem. The general problem is how to approach the social media in general, and regarding to our tool, how to approach the social media to try to contain some reluctance, but not everybody admitting. But let me come back to this idea. There are many people not involved in politics, not following politics at all. And then when campaign is approaching, they start to receive or to link or to follow political notice on politics or news on politics. They are discovering that Mr. Macron has married a man. It's a good news. For some of them, it's completely inconsequential if Mr. Macron decided to marry a man, or it could be relevant because he has not disclosed the situation, or is irrelevant for any other reason. But for many people, these kind of things happen only when they approach politics. I use a very ridiculous example, but there are many more subtle examples in which an unguarded, uncautious voter approaching the political debate could be engaged. And for that reason, I think literacy is needed, but we think to create some resort of reluctance. This is not real. But how can we do it when we have ruling the most powerful country in the world, a person who recommended to inject bleach to struggle with the COVID? How to really create some literacy when the misinformation has been carefully guided and used and weaponized by the most powerful government in the world? I mean, please, let's remind this idea that started with the first Trump, the alternative facts. There are no facts. There are several facts. There is no reality. There are several realities. You choose the reality you prefer for your purposes. And it's very difficult to create literacy. When you were talking about literacy, I was reminding this image of, do you remember the movie The Clockwork Orange? When the guy is put in with this, not able to close the eyes and following violent and thing. For many users, for many young people in the world, they have been submitted to this kind of treatment. The only way to observe reality is the mobile phone. And the mobile phone is full of traps. And they are being the first voters. And they are the voters that are in Europe preferring the extreme right. Because I'm sorry, I can be as naive or as positive. We are entering in a period again of political irrationalism. Irrationalism, meaning patriotism, guts, macho attitude, nothing related to rational ideas, but the other part of our mind and soul, that is the irrational part, being carefully breathed and carefully pampered by this kind of social media environment. This is my, sorry, not so optimistic view, on, at least for a while.
Thank you, Nacho, very much. Now, Armin, up to you. Challenging task.
Okay, thank you very much, and I hope I'm not taking too long to keep you from your coffee break. It was a very intense debate today, and I think a very super interesting panel, and I hope I do justice to what was said. First, there is a serious authoritarian threat of propaganda and disinformation throughout the electoral cycle. That was the overarching theme of it. The EU has been a standard set in the digital space with the Digital Services Act, the Media Freedom Act, the Transparency and Targeting of Political Advertising Act, the AI Act, and the Democracy Shield in the making. Yeah, these are important milestones, but independent oversight is key to that. So these rules take years to be implemented, to be included in national legislation, but the interference from outside, but also from within, is adapting quickly to with artificial intelligence, Gen AI tools, and it's a I think it was mentioned, a cat and mouse game. So there's also the big tech platforms. They use freedom of speech as a cover, allowing hate speech and disinformation to spread as it serves their business model. So I think Honorable Gese mentioned that this is an engagement-based ranking which promotes hatred, and that's where the European Commission could interfere and get active as DG Connect and limit that. Also, Honorable Gozzi mentioned the transparency allergy of the very large online platforms. What to do now? I would like to point out 3 areas which I thought would summarize the discussion. First, enforcement of legislation. So what is illegal offline is also illegal online, and especially the Digital Services Act and the GDPR, which was also mentioned, should be enforced. And here the laws are there, but the enforcement also needs to come from third-party side, independent third-party side, like citizens, civil society organizations, observers, monitors. Second, we need education and transparency. We need more of that, and transparency is key. And it seems that what we need is data access to the large online platforms, real-time transparency, and access and oversight by monitors, election observers, international citizen election observers. And then the third is preparedness and cooperation. So it's not one can do it by themselves. It's not the EU. It's not the Commission. It needs to be an effort together as the Commission, the different EU institutions, the European Parliament, regional organizations like the OSCE, civic organizations like EPDE, Memo 98, or our own organization, Election Watch EU. And I also think there's a question of resources in that matter. I think we have now agreed that this is a pressing issue within Europe, but also outside of Europe. The EU can become the light bearer of regulation of the online space and upholding democratic principles within the EU, but also worldwide. And I think for this, we need more resources, more focus, and a more political will from all. And I would like to ask for an applause to all the panel and the moderator, and be off to coffee.
Exactly. So, and thank you very much to all. So, indeed, we are 10 minutes late for the coffee break, but we still have 20 minutes.